1983, things go to a new level. What happened then?
Well, that's the sort of the time of real, almost we would consider it to be like a pogrom, where there was like a Kristallnacht kind of event where many, many Tamils were killed. It's widely written about, widely discussed events. And that's when we began to see a large number of Tamil refugees coming to Canada and going to the UK and other places, and a sense in the Tamil population that not only were they not able to make a living as easily, and not only were they discriminated against in the public service, but that their lives were at risk. At the same time, the Tamil Tigers, under the leadership of Prabhakaran, who's their leader, and as far as we know is still alive, though it's very hard to tell, but he does. There's no indication that he isn't. Became much more like a very radical guerrilla army, and frankly, the Tamil Tigers reinvented suicide bombing. I mean, they brought it back from hundreds and hundreds of years of not being used, but they created this kind of a cult of so-called black tigers, men and women, usually very young, who are sent into different places to carry out assassinations or to disrupt civilian life. And the conflict sort of grew through the 80s and 90s and became very, very, very difficult, very militant, very brutal, very bloody, in which, as you mentioned at the top of the program, literally tens of thousands of people were killed.
Now, in the early 2000s, you were part of a contingent that was trying to bring some sanity to the place. What was it that you were trying to accomplish in the main?
And the conflict sort of grew through the 80s and 90s and became very, very, very difficult, very militant, very brutal, very bloody, in which, as you mentioned at the top of the program, literally tens of thousands of people were killed. Well, what had happened, Steve, was that there was a ceasefire, which the Norwegians had a great deal to do in negotiating. A lot of outside countries had taken a great deal of interest in saying, let's try to get the fighting stopped. And frankly, both sides felt they could win a military victory. The events of 9/11 really changed it. 9/11, first of all, had an impact on the kind of funding and support that the LTTE could get from the wider Tamil diaspora around the world. And secondly, the Tigers had managed to inflict a lot of damage in Colombo itself, to disrupt the airport, for example, making commercial life very difficult and just making life terribly, terribly difficult. So there was a ceasefire negotiated in which certain battle lines were respected, certain areas and territory was respected, and it was at that point that the Forum of Federations was asked if we could give some advice to the process about what a possible federal type arrangement might look like, and we did our level best. I traveled there many, many times, went to all the conferences, met with the LTTE leaders in the jungle, essentially, along with David Cameron, who's the chairman of the Political Science Department at the University of Toronto, and a number of other international experts who we brought in. And we did our level best to try to get the parties to move off this notion that you either have a unitary country or you have two countries, to sort of trying to look at some sort of other devolved federal model as a possible solution. And frankly, there wasn't enough take-up really from either side. and then eventually the conflict was reignited.
Well, indeed, the ceasefire ended just over a year ago, and in fact, the Tamil Tigers at one point controlled 15,000 square kilometers of the island, but now the Sri Lankan army is on the verge of retaking the last few dozen square kilometers that the Tamils still hold. What, in your view, was responsible for this reversal of fortune?
Well, I think the Sri Lankan army was very well equipped. I mean, there's a lot of changes that took place in Sri Lanka. I mean, the political system in the south, amongst the majority Sinhala population, is quite complicated. But let's just say that a president with a more militant approach, President Rajapaksa, took power. His brother became the Minister of Defense. And I think they essentially decided that it was impossible from their perspective to talk to the Tigers, and that from their perspective, they saw the Tigers building up their military position while there was a ceasefire. There wasn't really any effective disarming going on, nor was there really much meeting of minds about any possible solutions. And so the fighting resumed. It actually there'd been a lot of fighting gone on before. The ceasefire was officially ended by the government. And the government is very well armed right now. They've been receiving arms from Pakistan and from Iran. Among a number of other places. And as I said, I think the post-9/11 era has made it more difficult for the LTTE to be able to establish the kinds of networks which would have allowed them to respond militarily as effectively as they obviously would have liked to. And frankly, they've been pushed way back. We now see a situation where you've got a very small piece of land at the northeast corner of the island, which is essentially a jungle with a lot of tunnels, because that's the LTT built, the Tigers built this whole tunnel system to allow them to get around, and a lot of civilians who are either being held or simply staying there because they don't know where else to go. And the UN estimates that as many as 250,000 people could still be there. The Sri Lankan government insists it's less than that, but still it's a very large number of civilians. And there's no question that their lives are at risk, and we've lost a lot of lives in the last several weeks. No journalists can go there. Very little humanitarian aid can get in. There are allegedly some camps which are supposed to be safe, but there's some evidence that one of the hospitals, for example, was bombed. The Red Cross is able to do a little bit, but the humanitarian situation is extremely tense and extremely difficult.